Okay, now we enter part two of the seven wonders of the ancient world. If you haven't seen part one, look in your top left hand corner at the very end of this one. I'm going to try to get this one done, although we're only on part four in this part right here, and therefore it should come up to the last part. If it doesn't, the very last one might be on itself on an own smaller video, and it'll be in the top left hand corner. Quite a few differences in these artifacts, but somewhat they have some self-meaning togetherness with them too. The next one we're looking at is the Mausoleum at Helicarnassus. It's also called the Tomb of Mausolus, but you won't hear him call it the Mausoleum of Mausolus because that would sound funny. Well, what's the deal with that? Well, all elaborate above-ground tombs since this time have been referred to as mausoleums. So let's look at this. It was a tomb built between 353 and 350, so it took about 3 years in Helicarnassus, which is present-day Bodrum, Turkey, from Mausolus, a native Anatolian from Caria, and a satrap of the Achaemenid or Persian Empire, and his sister wife Artemisia, too, of Caria. The structure was designed by the Greek architects Satyros and Pythias of Priene, and its elevated tomb structure is derived from the tombs of neighboring Lycia, which the Lycian kingdom, along with Phrygia and all those that we hear about. Strangely, you'll look at all those names together and it becomes all these different scales that are in music and where that came from off of here. But a territory of Mausoleus had invaded and annexed circa 360 BC, such as the Neerid Monument. Let's see if we can get it to pull up a decent picture of it here. No, I must have to pull it down and then get it to pop up. Not so much, but you can take a look at it here. It's the monument from the Nereids. He's known for it. The mausoleum was approximately 45 meters, or about 150 foot tall, and the four sides were adorned with sculptural reliefs, each created by one of the four Greek great sculptors of the time, Leochares, which showing his prowess here. What I always liked is the way they did fabrics. Surely they were the first people to have really captured the human form correctly. Well, you can't say that. You can see it in the Sumerians and the Egyptians and their bas relief things, but they're always in a stance and a pose and fiction to walk forward and things like this. And symbolic, rarely do you see something that's a gesture that looks so human that it almost looks like Medusa must have came in front of them and turned them to stone right at that moment. In fact, there are stories about such. Bryaxis, and he was the one who actually made the Serapis that we're so famously known for, that's actually the head of Zeus trapped inside of it and made to be a Jesus form. Here's a Jesus 2.1 form, if you will. And Scopus, but most of his stuff are all worn away, but he's famous for a copper statue of Aphrodite and the head of goddess Hydeia, who was the daughter of Asclepius himself, and so on, and Antipater of Sidon. Sidon, like Poseidon, yeah, that goes with that. Antipater of Sidon was an ancient Greek poet in the second half of the century, and Antipater is a weird name. Of course, nobody got that put on him as a child. The very first of it, can mean a few different things. When we think of it, though, it's the starting of the words antique. And so you think of something that's antiquary or back, but also it can be something that's against something, like anti-political. I don't want to be political. Anti this, you're anti that, anti this. Pater is father. We've gone through that before. In fact, variations of this, instead of Antipater, can be Diospater, and then Diospater is actually Jupiter, and we've talked about those forms of it. But Antipater, in a different form, is Dispater. And Dispater we actually know of as a form of the devil, believe it or not. But again, then Dispater actually came from Diospater too, and the god of the afterlife. Because once you die, you're going to end up being with God forever. And if you want to try to pull off this heaven and hell and bullshit and everything, well, there's some bad people go to hell, but all the other people go to an Elysian Fields type of thing. And hey, if you live on earth for 100 years, that's great. But apparently the eternity is with this god of the afterlife, right? So We'll go with it that way and just leave it at that. But all of these guys identified it or were hooked up with it, and then Antipater of Sidon identified it as one of his 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was destroyed by successive earthquakes from the 12th to the 15th century, so it's one of the things that lasted the longest. In fact, the one that's only left now is the Great Pyramids, pretty much intact, although it used to have the shell around it of smooth stones that no longer exist on it. Well, they're all used to make up most of what ancient Cairo is made up of now. But it was the last surviving of the 6 destroyed wonders, and the word mausoleum has now come to become used generally for an above-ground tomb. So let's take a look at this. First of all, I guess in this picture, it's going to be real small on your here, but you can see Anatolia, Asia Minor, whichever you want to call it, modern-day Turkey. And over here in the far left-hand corner, out onto the Mediterranean, is where it's located. In fact, all of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, 5 of which are all located out onto the Mediterranean someplace, and then we have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and the Egyptian pyramids. So let's look at this, and then I'll read you off whatever I put into it. But first, let's look at this thing, I guess from bottom to top. It was described as from the bottom having a Persianish type look, and I don't know if it's showing up well. I'm going to zoom in crazy, okay? All right. You can kind of tell that this looks like Persian style because people seem to be shaking hands and looking back and forth and talking and going up in a procession. And this was always like a procession going up to see the king. And on the side here, they're all slowly going in to see the king. There is no place that they're coming out, though. It's just symbolic and everything, but this was all around it and everything. And then the next level above it is a level that each side was supposed to have been somewhat different and blended around the corners, where it was different famous wars and things like that that they had, and battle scenes and so on of it. And then you go on up this pyramidion type thing, and then you saw a Greek style edifice on it, and they had all the Greek gods and important people that were on there, and again huge columns and a centerpiece onto it, so it was kind of hollowed out in a way to have this on there. And on top of that was a pyramid, and on top of pyramid was other symbolic meanings and statues they said were all around it, different than the ones at the corners and so on. And then topping the whole thing off was a 4-horse chariot. It's very symbolic, and it was the sun god again. So we can see that sun god symbology just all over the place, and a lot more places that we're mentioning even at this time, with all of these people that are connected to each other in ancient times. But so that's that depiction of it. Let me go to another one. Again, it would be way over here in the corner, almost off the screen here. And so there's a few that are right here on it. One's up over there, one's down here in Babylon, and then we have one at the top of the delta of Egypt, which is the Alexandria Lighthouse. And then, so really all of them can be seen right in this little ring right here. And portions of the Fertile Crescent, if you will, from end to end, and then into the Aegean pretty much exclusively, if you will, rather than going further. In a modern day, we would have a lot of different forms that we would talk about. This is said to be the sun god, or Apollo, here on the left-hand side, which might be somebody that's on the top of that whole pyramid, but they also said that this man kind of deified and was that situation. But many argue that he was not that situation, for he mimics, and he and his sister and the whole convolution of it all mimics something else, and that mimics something from before. We'll get into this here. As you look at this coin, the right hand side is supposed to be Zeus, but Zeus is shown not with a thunderbolt, but now he's shown with a labrys. And we've talked a lot recently about the labrys and its connectives to ancient stargazers and astronomy and everything. It's not just a hatchet. It real conveniently works out in a hatchet way, but if you were going to make a true hatchet, you would do it in a different way. that there's a symbology that's attached to that. Not holding a scepter, not holding a lightning bolt attached through this right here. Here's what I had written. Tomb of Mausoleus at Helicarnassus, which is a sun city. And before I start even, his father died and he took over for it in the first place. And then he went around and took a few other sites over and got things back going again and tried to pump it up. Kind of turned into a little bit of a tyrant somewhat and a jerk, which it seems like everybody reports that whenever somebody tries to build one of these big things, they turn into a jerk. You can imagine how things went through that, but it's on the southern coast of Anatolia, with modern-day Turkey. It may sound unfamiliar to most, but this monument of love, much like the famed Taj Mahal, is carried through the ages. For all lavish tombs above ground are now called mausoleums. In Caria, it's a tale of two lovers, locked in a desperate attempt to preserve their immortality and their love and devotion for one another, like the timeless tale of Inanna and Dumuzi, that they mimic the seasons of our lives. Mausoleus was a Persian Aryan prince ruling over Anatolia over the time previous to Alexander, whenever the Persians were ruling in things. She was his lovely queen, Artemitia, said to be a brother and sister, like the gods were, and which is likely as much symbolic. He wanted a multicultural society, not all inclusive, but where he, like others before, were worshipped as gods, and he became a tyrant and unliked by the local people during the building of this and at the end of his reign. It says over here in the side margins again, he refounded Helicarnassus, which is the city of the sun, and one wonders if he's related to Cyrus and Darius the Great. Some say. Others say that no, he was somebody that was locally living there, and that family lineage was living there through the Persian takeover, and when the Persians backed off, they just put him in place. Though it's one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, its mystery is what it even looked like, actually. Said to be a multi-staged or stepped pyramid-type structure using all Aryan-type technology and architecture. The bottom base was the Persian inset style, where he and Artemitia's tomb was. Next was a Greek colonnaded temple. Above that, Egyptian-style stepped pyramid topped with a sun god pulled by 4-horse chariots of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. With more than 250 statues, brightly painted, adorning niches and each level, it was a pyramid-topped mausoleum, much like the recent one I showed in Anatolia, Syria, known as the Pyramid of God or the Pyramid of El, only far larger and more elaborate. I wrote that in the last little part in here. When he died in 353 BC, he was cremated, which is telling, and his still warm ashes were added to a spiced wine or a soma drink for her to drink from a golden cup like the Grail to imbibe his essence and bond themselves for all eternity. Yeah, some weirdness goes along with this a little bit. At his tomb were found thousands of left animal sacrifices and a pool of congealed blood on the steps spilling out into the courtyard below of biblical proportions. She died 2 years later, and the kingdom was in ruins, and with no money, it was said, or payment, the masons continued and actually finished their work. Pliny the Elder said that they finished their work to protect their own integrity, because each one of these was a great sculptor that was well renowned, and they wanted to finish off their work even at the end where they weren't going to be paid. This picture here looks kind of odd, and you just say, well, there's some columns knocked to rubble, and what's all this? This is where this used to sit. Now it's all really pretty much gone away, and there's some modern stuff built in and around it. There are places you can come and look at it and walk through the ruins of it right now, but it's nowhere near the thing that you would have gone. For as I've said already a few times probably, this Seven Wonders of the World was the first real bucket list of the Greeks, where they went around and they said, you know, there's been some badass shit been built, and if you're going around and doing that thing that people like to do through the Middle East and around back through in Egypt, everybody's got to see it. There are things that are kind of on the way to each other a little bit, not too far out of the way, and you can make this roundabout and see the seven wonders of the ancient world. Let's go to the next picture here. This is what he looked like. And I know probably the thoughts that are running through your mind, the first thing that you would think of is he's very Jesus-esque. That you may not have thought that the Persians quite looked like that, or the people that would have been in that area, and he actually looks a little more Aryan, or perhaps he looks a little bit more German, or perhaps he looks a little more Celtic, doesn't he? You could see this person is a Celt real quick. Put a little paint on him and da-da-da, you know, put a headband around him, do things like that. It wouldn't take much. But also we would recognize him as a Proto-Indo-European type looking person in the same jest too, wouldn't we? There's a few other statues. This is a casting off of one that they have at a museum. A few different statues that they've done, and it was said the great Greek sculptors that did this could capture an essence pretty well. And you can see the three different ones of him don't look different. Like quite often you kind of see some of the Greeks and it's like, hold on, was he chubby or not, or was this going on or not? How much hair did he have? Well, that can grow out and in, but there are differences to some of the statues they see on these. You really can kind of see the essence of the person with it. At one time, this thing would have been painted up too. Yeah. Maybe even had inset eyes and things like that. So, anyhow, he was pretty much looked like a tyrant, you know, or whatever. But when he died in 353 BC, he was cremated. And they went through this rituals, and people noted that it was something that was, you know, biblical proportions here. And this site, dedicated to the love of them and everything that it instilled into it, lasted on for over 1,000 years, set into ruin by an earthquake. Yet it was still marveled at by the Templars, who recorded many of its still existing artworks and statues and frescoes and friezes, as the stones were taken away to reinforce the fortress of St. Peter's Castle to guard against the Turks, which is why we call it modern-day Turkey now, whenever they came in, much of which was bisqued into lime from its limestone, used to make concrete, sadly, but they did keep quite a bit of the pretty or intricate pieces that they could keep out of it. We'll look at some of them here in a minute. In fact, let's scooch here again. Here's a look at the architectural look of it, and see, by the time that they did it, they knew what the pillars looked like and the colonnades at the top of it on the Greek part, and how some of the pieces of the facades worked. So people made depictions out of that situation, and to see what it looked like in the general layout. And so it had this general hollow that's into it and everything. But then, was there any way to even get up in there? Well, apparently there was, but they couldn't figure it out. Oh yeah, there was a ramp that came up inside of it here. But they noted that there was lions in front of it, and then there were depictions of people on horses braying up and so on it, and all these different depictions, right? But here you can see Bernier, Oldfield, Stevenson. Everybody's got a different slight variation on a theme of what it looked like. In fact, the middle one here is Newton and Pullen of 1862. But all around this time, people are definitely real interested in drawing architectural drawings of this supposed building off of the things that we're told. Some are even a rotund, some are very pointy like this one, and like this one going in a colonnade in a way. So, kind of neat. Here, I guess I can show you one of the other depictions of him. That looks almost exactly like it. In fact, I almost want to say, well, they must have done that cast that they did earlier off of this one. Well, it's missing part of its hair and its thing, but yeah, maybe they did. Looks very similar. So I guess that's what they were saying, whenever all of them look kind of similar. So you can kind of get his essence into it. But sadly, a lot of her depictions, Artemitis, is destroyed past the point that you can't really see what she looked like. She looked like a little heavy. I wouldn't call it a lot. But look at the way they do their sheets and robes over them, and the way that it pulls across their body and stuff. This was something they were just a master of. And in fact, whenever you come into the Renaissance and painting, that was one of the things that stood out. Not only could they kind of catch somebody and the glint in their eye and so on, but really fabrics and stuff. But also they quite often, if you'll look, they threw in a lot of this fabric like this so they could show off the fact that they could do a shading, which really made that look and popped. So here's some of those depictions here, and if you'll look at it for a second, we'll go ahead and continue on. If you look closely at this, this is a guy from the area here, like a Persian or a Greek, naked in battle. Behind that horse there on the left, he's going down, trying to defend himself. And if you look real close, he's trying to defend himself from a woman, because this is part of the fresco that was known as the attack of the Amazons, and how they had fought mythically against these women and stuff. And then there's another Scythian connection, along with the fact that there's a horse on the other side of his body. But though this towering pyramidion is gone now, its legacy lives on. It's one of the giant, great monuments of love and devotion, like the Taj Mahal we know of today, which all of the ancients concurred upon, that this epic Aryan symbol of love deserved to be on the most famous list of the 7 sacred wonders of the ancient world. It was this bucket list where people needed to see it. Here's an add-on. There's no mistake here. Her name was Artemitia, meaning ancient or artifact mother, and we hear of Artemis and her daring, brave love for Adonis, like Inanna and Tammuz before, which, for its own symbolic as well as cultural remembrance, was enshrined as one of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world. Let's look at some more of these pictures here. They do shields and concave into them real well. And even though this is pseudo bas relief, it's like bas relief that we all know of from the Egyptians and Sumerians, but it's bas relief to one more level. The statue is still connected to the rock, but it's about as far connected in some cases as it can get, and just not freed up from the stone. If you were to carve around behind it a little more, you'd get just a statue directly out of it. Other ones, like the lady you can see here, half her body is stuck into it, and she's almost like Han Solo and stuck in carbonite. This is strange here. This is a Alabaster Carved Out Jug, and you see me talk about these and these objects that were made in ancient Egypt and the pre-dynastic coming into it as these ooparts that no one really understands how they created something so well made. Only this is from Xerxes of Persia. Yeah, so it, and he was a satrap of all that, so it goes along with it. And so he must have put it there in homage to them, something that he had gotten from Egypt. And if you'll look, it's carved and it has his name in hieroglyphics upon it. Right there. So again, we look at the area that everything is, and it's all on the Mediterranean. 1, 2, 3, 4, where we're at now, 5, and then not too far up off the delta right here is the Egyptian pyramids, and then the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which they show it right up here, but it's either really probably right here or on the other river right across and right up here. It could be at Nippur too, just as well as it could be there. It's the reason that they don't really know where that it's at. And again, looking at this timeline here, you can tell that they all overlap each other, and it really only lasts for some 90 years where they're all perfectly intact. Of course, the structures last on longer and then fade. And if we figured it out there, that's how we know exactly whenever they were doing this. But this list went long after, and people were still looking at a lot of these things. Instead of the Colossus anymore, they were looking at the crushed Colossus on the ground when they would go there. It was still enough a marvel to look at and then try to figure out what it looked like when it was originally standing up and imagine it. Put their hands around the finger, and a grown man could barely touch his fingers around one of the fingers. Here's one of the 4 horses, of the 4-horse chariot that was up on top. Had a full bridle set and everything going on it. Can't really see the symbology that are on the medallions on the side of it here, but it's full dressed out and looks fantastic. And I'm sure all 4 of them did, and the chariot was elaborate too. I heard that it was gold gilded up on top of there and glistened in the sun. And again, it was the sun god pulling across the chariot. A lot of the stones from there were ended up used to fortify this castle, and this is whenever the Templars had come in, and the Knights Hospitaller, if you will. And in the fight against the Turks, this was one of the strongholds that they had, and they kept a lot of the artworks that we're looking at now inside of this as they demolished the rest of it to help make concrete to reinforce a lot of the walls and turn this into more of a fortress. That's still there today. Again, right off the Mediterranean and set. You can see the colonnades on top of it at the time, and it almost looks like something you'd think of in the medieval lands of Europe and stuff. Oh yeah, well, this was that time whenever they rebuilt and put the colonnades on it, but we've also seen the ancient Hittites had some rampart tops that look extremely similar to this. Thousands of years before that. So there's that statue again, and here's somebody giving a presentation to a group of people at the museum that it's at. What is the name museum? British Museum itself, they're just going to say. And here are some of those insets that are on the walls that they have. There are different types, although a lot of these were a lot larger. And there is her and him. That's the same picture we were looking at earlier, but a little different. Here they are alone. It's another depiction of her. It's totally different because her face is not so smashed. Arms are missing, almost like Venus. Ding. One of the lions from out front of one of the doors or false doors that they had where the procession of Persians were going into. It said only one of those was real, the rest of them were false doors. You can see those in Egypt and Samaria and all kinds of places, but there too. Here we go again, and you can tell, if you're paying attention at all, that there are males and females in this fight. And that this is an ancient Persian, and he is ended up fighting against an Amazon, and she's pulling back a bow. He would have been holding something too, probably a spear. And here you can see her fighting too, and this is of course a woman or an Amazon. So you can see depictions of what they thought they looked like at the time. Hey, and this one here is supposed to be Hercules, and it looks like him, draped across the way that they normally draw him. Got his club and everything. and he's holding the head of, oh, what's her name? The Amazon Queen Hippolyta during the conflict that they had in there. And this is all eroded away pretty bad, but that still shows pretty decent. And it shows how they also cut the blocks, but then when they made them to where when they put them together, it still looked just right. These conflicts going on here. There's another one that shows something that looks like this too, though. There again is the first picture that we looked at. And here's another picture of a Persian, or Greek if you will, but no, that's the Persian style of it. And then coming down onto this Amazon here, you can see she's well made. Again, Amazon fighting somebody. And they said that they had taken people's faces that they knew, and these sculptures are so good, that looks like this person, that one looks like this person, and some of the ambiguous people were other people of the time that they just scattered in, you know, like, well, this is supposed to be the battle between so-and-so, and there's 6 guys on here, so the others are going to be the artist himself and somebody else, the other guy that's shipping right over here. Oh, yeah? Well, I'm going to put you in mine. I'm going to put you in mine, and so on. Oh, that could be a lot of hearsay, but we may not ever know out of that. Here's a black and white done of a similar type, and you can see this horse braying up, how well it looked. Again, Amazons. So apparently they got that wall of the Amazons pretty well. Here's something a little telling. That Amazon woman there got that Phrygian cap. Yep. Oh, here's the other one that I said kind of looks like that. This is another great warrior, and he's got a hold of a woman, and they thought that might be Hippolyta too, because there's a story that Hippolyta was fighting, and then this one girl comes in and tries to avenge him, and he ain't paying attention. Ha ha. Well, this looks like that moment, kind of. And also something to note, again, all these were painted brightly colored. It's all but gone away now, but if you look closely, you can tell that her hair used to be red or blonde. It's got a little bit of coloration compared to the rest of it. And I bet if they took that little machine and went on there like they've used on so many things, they could figure out how brightly colored this used to be colored. And her dress used to be blue, and hers used to be green, and his is, you know, and all this. We always look back at the Greeks, and everything looks like it's polished and alabaster and just like this and da-da-da and everything. Well, even though they made it like that, then they painted it. Which some people think that they ruin it and everything, but if you want to see it the way that it really was, that's the truth of it. You can see this battle going on here. Looks like Alexander the Great, doesn't it? It's a little before its time, though, isn't it? Yeah? Huh. Knock, knock. Who's there? Amazon with a hatchet. So even though this is one of the ones that's least known and has least amount of stuff you can say about it, this has actually got a lot to go along with it. It tells quite the story here. And there's enough of it left. You can get the gist out of some of it. One only wonders what other type of tellings and stuff they have showing on the other now gone pieces that used to contain all over it, because it was elaborate like hell. It wasn't just, oh, there was one little ring of this, that, and the other. There was one here, one here, one here, and it goes all the way around, and we're only looking at the contents, which probably encompassed one side around a corner. All in battle. Battle of the Amazons. If you were to read it and then start using this as a picture background while it's going on in the fight scene they talk about, probably go along pretty well with it. Here it is again. Here's somebody who grabs that lady by the hair. Supposed to have been like Hercules, but they're like, well, he's got a sword scabbard there. Not really a club, but his arm's not here anymore, but you can see the point where it was still attached to the wall. Like I was saying, these sculptures aren't even but barely attached, so it has a good 3D effect. And what did it have on it? They probably had a sword and not having a club on it. But if it had a club, is that Hercules? Is this the same situation? And why would they double it up on the scene? Again, we look through this, and here's that Scythian, Amazonian type woman coming on, looking like Mithra in her Phrygian cap, and her cape flowing behind her. It's kind of telling, too. We're about to go on as soon as these end, but I just want to get this on out of the way. This one's quite well worn, but still has some of the weapons and stuff going on. You can see the women running. I don't think these are even in order, like left to right. Like if you were to do them left to right, they all go left to right. A few of them do, not all of them. This has got something written all over the shield. What does it say? Not gonna do it. But this is the Amazonamaki. You know, the Titanamaki? This is the Amazonamaki, and how that all broke down in the Scythians and so on. We talked about a few times. There's a different looking horse, real thick, kind of war horse looking. Again, here's another frieze that's just worn away over time, but they kept it. Here's one that's kind of telling. It's outside at this place, but kept up on our garden area. And here you have an Amazonian lady. He's again grabbing her hair. You can see even on the back wall that's done, they wisped hair there, and then they would have had a head and hair, and her head getting pulled. And she looks like she's trying to block it, and he's kicking. And it looks like his knee went up here and then down here, and that's his foot. That's not her other arm. Here's her shoulder and her other arm over there, so it looks like his foot, like he's, and he's trying to kick into her. No jokes, everybody. Amazons. So there's been some places that have said either we're inspired by or built directly in the guise of. And you can see this sculpture that's up in here, and a little bit telling, and they tell you Iran, Atlantic, Mediterranean, Red Sea, Persian Gulf, Indian Ocean, Java Sea, Coral Sea, and Pacific. And they've got this, looks somewhat like it, but oh man, well that's nowhere near as tall. In fact, the Greek thing is down on the bottom, and it's not the same. And there's now a fire thing that's up there, and not a 4-horse chariot deal. But let's just go with inspired. And there's also a perpetual flame going on here. Here's another place that's directly inspired. What is this? This is the Scottish Rite. Temple of Scottish Rite. You know, the Masons and stuff. So what do they have going on? Well, they got it hooked up. They've made a place that looks pretty much like it. And although there's not the Persian bottom that would have been wrapped around it here, and instead of the lions just being there, they are Sphinx. Yeah. Pretty neat. Here's a little mausoleum type place, and it's built in. I wonder if this is the one that's got the stuff up in the top of it. You can see up in there. There you go, you can see up in there. Some of these are rosettes, and is this the one where some of them are swastikas and some of them are Stars of David and so on? This is all sacred geometry, all cut all up in here. You can tell that easily from it. Look at how that's incised all around in there. It's supposed to be something on the inside of the tomb. It's not on the outside. Woo, gaudy. It's right here. Not gaudy. Gaudy. Yeah. There's one of the rosettes symbolizing a sun dished out. They're all over the place. Four flower petaled rosettes on the sides over here and stuff too. So like a poppy type frieze on that. The way this is all cut out. So this is supposed to have been directly inspired by it and some of its edifices. Pretty cool. And that's the Mausoleum at Helicarnassus. Pardon me. Now we're going to go on to the Colossus of Rhodes. Yeah, this is pretty interesting here. Colossus, Colossus of Radu, was a statue of the sun god Helios in the city of Rhodes on the Greek island of the same name. Charles Lindos in 200 by Charles of Lindos in 280 BC, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. It's constructed to celebrate the successful defiance of the Rhodes city against the attack by Demetrius Poliorcetes, who had besieged it for a year with a large army and navy. According to most contemporary descriptions, the Colossus stood approximately 70 cubits, or 33 meters, or 108 feet high. Funny how that 108 keeps showing up in some things. The sacred geometry number. But approximately the height of the modern Statue of Liberty, from feet to crown, making it the tallest statue in the ancient world. It collapsed during the earthquake of 226 BC, although parts of it were preserved and kept there. In accordance with certain oracle, the Rhodesians did not build it again. The oracle told them there was an omen, don't try to rebuild it. John Malalas wrote that Hadrian, in his reign, re-erected the Colossus, but he was mistaken. According to Suda, the Rhodesians were called Colossians because they erected the statue on that island. Since 2008, a series of as yet unrealized proposals to build a new Colossus at Rhodes Harbor have been announced, although the actual location of the original monument still remains in dispute, because it couldn't have been big enough to straddle the harbor like a lot of pictures or depictions of people made of it whenever they didn't even go to the harbor to see that, well, oh, that's far too wide. Well, where did they have it? Well, it was on the side of the harbor. Yeah, and it was made out of, supposedly, one of the giant siege towers that these Macedonian people had tried to go against them with. And after they killed them off, they took that. In fact, the story is that there were so many of them that they defeated that all their weapons and armor together melted down was enough to make the whole thing. Other people look at it and say that wouldn't have even made but a leg, and that the world was taxed. Other people said, no, that's bullshit, because it was well known that the world was taxed as far as copper goes to even make the copper for it at the time. Let's see what I got here. I want to look down, and it's just going to show you the same thing about the 7. So here it is on the side of the harbor and not straddling anything. And a lot of people believe that this is the way that it looked, but a lot of others say, well, that draping robe behind him draped over and in front of his legs too, because the whole thing that made up the bottom 2/3 of his body from the middle of his chest down was this giant siege tower that they used. And so therefore, unless they used 2 siege towers, it would have been more of a closed leg stance, or together at least like this, but also having another effect. Also, you see here his hands just gesturing out. And in the actual depiction, they said that he had some type of bowl that would, I don't know how people would get back up there and put fire into it and things, like a lighthouse, but not so much. And maybe it was only lit during ceremonies and so on, but you can definitely see a extreme resemblance to the Statue of Liberty. Straddling a prosperous harbor of a South Anatolian island of Rhodes, there once stood a statue much taller than any colossal statues of Egypt or Zeus himself on this list. Over 110 foot total, counting the points on top of his head, 108 foot conspicuous asterisk next to it. It says here, already at this time, tall, nearly as tall as the Statue of Liberty, which is its modern recreation, which also embraces its essence, but as Athena or Nike. enacting the rites of Helios and the sun god with rays coming out of its head too. He was the Colossus of Rhodes. Rites of Helios, the sun god, a giant bronze, gleaming, naked man with perhaps a sash, like Jesus, hanging down below his legs,